Maurice Henri Joseph Schérer. Jean Marie Maurice Schérer, known as Éric Rohmer, was a French film director, film critic, journalist, novelist, screenwriter and teacher. Rohmer was the last of the post-World War II French New Wave directors to become established. He edited the influential film journal, Cahiers du cinéma, from 1957 to 1963, while most of his colleagues, among them Jean-Luc, Godard and François Truffaut, were making the transition from film critics to filmmakers and gaining international attention. Rohmer gained international acclaim around 1969 when his film My Night at Maud'S was nominated at the Academy Awards. He won the San Sebastian International Film Festival with Claire's Knee in 1971 and the Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival for The Green Ray in 1986. Rohmer went on to receive the Venice Film Festival's Career Golden Lion in 2001. After Rohmer's death in 2010, his obituary in the Daily Telegraph described him as the most durable filmmaker of the French New Wave, outlasting his peers, and still making movies the public wanted to see. Late in his career. Early life. Rohmer was born Maurice Henri Joseph Schérer in Tulle in south-central France, the son of Mathilde and Lucien Schérer. Rohmer was a Catholic. He was secretive about his private life and often gave different dates of birth to reporters. He fashioned his pseudonym from the names of two famous artists, actor and director Erich von Stroheim and writer Sax Rohmer, author of the Fu Manchu series. Rohmer was educated in Paris and received an advanced degree in history. He also studied literature, philosophy and theology as a student. Career as a journalist. Rohmer first worked as a teacher in Clermont-Ferrand. In the mid-1940s he quit his teaching job and moved to Paris, where he worked as a freelance journalist. In 1946 he published a novel, Elizabeth, under the pen name Gilbert Cordier. In about 1949, while living in Paris, Rohmer first began to attend screenings at Henry Langlois's Cinémathèque Française, where he first met and befriended Jean-Luc Godard, François Truffaut, Claude Chabrol, Jacques Rivette and other members of the French New Wave. Rohmer had never been very interested in film and always preferred literature, but soon became an intense lover of films and switched from journalism to film criticism. He wrote film reviews for such publications as Revue du Cinéma, Arts, Temps Moderns and La Parisienne. In 1950, he co-founded the film magazine La Gazette du Cinéma with Rivette and Godard. However, its existence was short-lived. In 1951, Rohmer joined the staff of André Bazin's newly founded film magazine Cahiers du cinéma, of which he would eventually become the editor in 1956. There, Rohmer established himself as a critic with a distinctive voice. Fellow Cahiers contributor and French New Wave filmmaker Luc Molet later remarked that, unlike the more aggressive and personal writings of younger critics like Truffaut and Godard, Rohmer favored a rhetorical style that made extensive use of questions and rarely used the first-person singular. Rohmer was known as being more politically conservative than most of the staff at Cahiers, and his opinions were highly influential on the direction of the magazine during his time as editor. Rohmer first published articles under his real name, but began using Éric Rohmer in 1955 so that his family would not find out that he was involved in the film world, of which they would have disapproved. Rohmer's best-known article was Le Celluloid et le Marbre in 1955, which examines the relationship between film and other arts. In the article, Rohmer states that in an age of cultural self-consciousness, film is the last refuge of poetry, and the only contemporary art form from which metaphor could still spring naturally and spontaneously. In 1957, Rohmer and Claude Chabrol wrote Hitchcock, the earliest book-length study of Alfred Hitchcock. It focuses on Hitchcock's Catholic background and is described as one of the most influential film books since the Second World War, casting new light on a filmmaker hitherto considered a mere entertainer. Hitchcock helped establish the auteur theory as a critical method and contributed to the re-evaluation of the American cinema that was central to the method. By 1963, Rohmer was becoming more at odds with some of the more radical left-wing critics at Cahiers du cinéma. He continued to admire U.S. films while many of the other left-wing critics had rejected U.S. films and were championing cinéma verite and Marxist film criticism. Rohmer resigned that year and was succeeded by Jacques Rivette. Film career, 1950 to 1962, shorts and early film career. In 1950, Rohmer made his first 16mm short film, Journal d'un Scélérat. The film starred writer Paul Gauguin and was made with a borrowed camera. By 1951, Rohmer had a bigger budget provided by friends and shot the 35mm short film Présentation au Charlotte Sunsteak. The 12-minute film was co-written by and starred Jean-Luc Godard. The film was not completed until 1961. In 1952, Rohmer began collaborating with Pierre Gilbeault on a one-hour short feature, Les Petites Filles Modèles, but the film was never finished. In 1954, Rohmer made and acted in Berenice, a 15-minute short based on a story by Edgar Allan Poe. In 1956, Rohmer directed, wrote, edited and starred in Le Sonnet à Kreutzer, a 50-minute film produced by Godard. In 1958, Rohmer made Véronique sans Cancer, a 20-minute short produced by Chabrol. Chabrol's company AJYM produced Rohmer's feature directorial debut, The Sign of Leo, in 1959. In the film, an American composer spends the month of August waiting for his inheritance while all his friends are on vacation and gradually becomes impoverished. It included music by Louis Sagva. The Sign of Leo was later recut and rescored by distributors when Chabrol was forced to sell his production company and Rohmer disowned the recut version. In 1962, Rohmer and Barbara Schroeder co-founded the production company Les Films de Lausanne. Les Films de Lausanne produced all of Rohmer's work. 1962 to 1972, 6 moral tales and TV work. Rohmer's career began to gain momentum with a cycle of films that he titled 6 Moral Tales. Each tale follows the same story, inspired by F.W. Murnau's Sunrise. A man, married or otherwise committed to a woman, is tempted by a second woman but eventually returns to the first woman. These films are subtle psychological investigations about what characters think about the behavior than about the behavior itself. The French word moraliste does not translate to the English word moral and has more to do with what someone thinks and feels. Rohmer has cited the works of writers Blaise Pascal, Jean de La Bruyère, François de La Rochefoucauld and Smdl as inspirations for the series of films. Rohmer explained that I persuaded myself that the best thing would be to treat the subject 6 times over. I was determined to be flexible and intractable, because if you persist in an idea it seems to me that in the end you'd secure a following. The first moral tale was The Bakery Girl of Monceau in 1963. This 26-minute film portrays a boy who sees a girl in the street and spends days obsessively searching for her. He meets a second girl in a bakery and begins to flirt with her, but abandons her once he finally finds the first girl. Schroeder starred as the young man and Bertrand Tavernier was the narrator. The second moral tale was Suzanne's Career, made in 1963. This 60-minute film portrays a young student who is rejected by one woman and begins a romantic relationship with a second woman. The first and second moral tales were never theatrically released, and Rohmer was disappointed by the poor technical quality. They were not well known until after the release of the other four moral tales. In 1963, Les Films de Lausanne produced the new wave omnibus film 6 in Paris, in which Rohmer's short Place de l'Étoile was the centerpiece. After being driven out of his editor position at Cahiers du cinéma, Rohmer began making short documentaries for French television. Between 1964 and 1966, Rohmer made 14 shorts for television through the Office de radiodiffusion Télévision Française and Télévision Scolaire. These films included episodes of filmmakers of our time on Louis Lumière and Carl Theodor Dreyer, educational films on Blaise Pascal and Stéphane Mallarmé, and documentaries on the Percival legend, the Industrial Revolution, and female students in Paris. Rohmer later said that TV taught him how to make readable images. He later stated, "When you show a film on TV, the framing goes to pieces, straight lines are warped. The way people stand and walk and move, the whole physical dimension. All this is lost. Personally, I don't feel that TV is an intimate medium." Quote. In 1964, Rohmer made the 13-minute short film Nature Paris with cinematographer Nestor Almendros. Rohmer and Schroeder then sold the rights of two of the short films to French TV in order to raise $60,000 to produce the feature film La Collectionneuse in 1967, the third moral tale. The film's budget only went to film stock and renting a house in Saint-Tropez as a set. Rohmer described it as a film about l'amour par déçouvement. La Collectionneuse won the Jury Grand Prix at the 17th Berlin International Film Festival and was praised by French film critics, although U.S. film critics called it boring. The fourth moral tale was My Night at Maud'S in 1969. The film was made with funds raised by François Truffaut, who liked the script, and was initially intended to be the third moral tale. But because the film takes place on Christmas Eve, Rohmer wanted to shoot the film on and around Christmas Eve. Actor Jean-Louis Trintignant was not available, so filming was delayed for an entire year. The film centers around Pascal's wager and stars Trintignant, Françoise Fabian, Marie-Christine Barrault and Antoine Vitesse. My Night at Maud's was Rohmer's first successful film both commercially and critically. It was screened and highly praised at the 1969 Cannes Film Festival and later won the Prix Max Sophals in France. It was released in the US and praised by critics there as well. It eventually received Oscar nominations for Best Original Screenplay and Best Foreign Film. James Monaco said that, "Here, for the first time, the focus is clearly set on the ethical and existential question of choice. If it isn't clear within Maud who actually is making the wager and whether or not they win or lose, that only enlarges the idea of le pari into the encompassing metaphor that Rohmer wants for the entire series." The fifth moral tale was Le Gino d'Eclair, made in 1970. It went on to win the Grand Prix at the San Sebastian International Film Festival, the Prix Louis Deluc and the Prix Méliès, and was a huge international success. Vincent Canby called it something close to a perfect film. Quote, "It was Rohmer's second film shot in color, with Rohmer explaining the presence of the lake and the mountains is stronger in color than in black and white. It is a film I couldn't imagine in black and white. The color green seems to me essential in that film. This film would have no value to me in black and white." The sixth and final moral tale was Love in the Afternoon in 1972. Film critic Molly Haskell criticized the film for betraying the rest of the series by making a moral judgment on the main character and approving of his decision in the film. Overall, Rohmer stated that he wanted the six moral tales to portray in film what seemed most alien to the medium, to express feelings buried deep in our consciousness. That's why they have to be narrated in the first-person singular. The protagonist discusses himself and judges his actions. I filmed the process. 1972 to 1987 Adaptations and comedies and amp proverbs. Following the moral tales, Rohmer wanted to make a less personal film and adapted a novella by Heinrich von Kleist, Le Marquis d'O. In 1976. It was one of Rohmer's most critically acclaimed films, with many critics ranking it with My Night at Maud's and Claire's Knee. Rohmer stated that it wasn't simply the action I was drawn to, but the text itself. I didn't want to translate it into images, or make a filmed equivalent. I wanted to use the text as if Kleist himself had put it directly on the screen, as if he were making a movie. Kleist didn't copy me and I didn't copy him, but obviously there was an affinity. In 1978 Rohmer made the Holy Grail legend film Perceval le Gaulois, based on a 12th-century manuscript by Chrétien de Troyes. The film received mostly poor critical reviews. Tom Milne said that the film was almost universally greeted as a disappointment, at best a whimsical exercise in the faux naif in its attempt to capture the poetic simplicity of medieval faith, at worst an anticlimactic blunder, and that it was rather like watching the animation of a medieval manuscript, with the text gravely read aloud while the images, cramped and crowded, colored with jeweled brilliance, delighting the eye with bizarre perspectives, magnificently play the role traditionally assigned to marginal illuminations. Quote, in 1980 Rohmer made a film for television of his stage production of Kleist's play Catherine de Heilbronn, another work with a medieval setting. Later in 1980 Rohmer embarked on a second series of films, the Comedies and Proverbs, where each film was based on a proverb. The first comedy and proverb was The Aviator's Wife, which was based on an idea that Rohmer had had since the mid-1940s. This was followed in 1981 with Le Beau Mariage, the second comedy and proverb. Rohmer stated that, "What interests me is to show how someone's imagination works. The fact that obsession can replace reality." Quote, in his review of the film critic Claude Bain has said that Éric Rohmer is a virtuoso of the paint sketch, at ease with the paint tubes that Perceval required, a tiny figurine whose every feature, every curl, every tone is aimed at revealing to us a state of soul and of heart. Raphael Basson said that the filmmaker fails to achieve in these dialogues the flexibility, the textual freedom of The Aviator's Wife. A perfect marriage is only a variation on the spiritual states of the petty bourgeois who go on and on forever about the legitimacy of certain institutions or beliefs confronted by problems of the emotions. Quite simply, this is a minor variation on this central Rohmerian theme. The third comedy and proverb was Pauline at the Beach in 1983. It won the Silver Bear for Best Director at the 33rd Berlin International Film Festival. It was based on an idea that Rohmer had in the 1950s, originally intended for Brigitte Bardot. Rohmer often made films that he had been working on his many years and stated, "I can't say I make one film, then after that film I look for a subject and write on that subject, then I shoot." Not at all. These are films that are drawn from one evolving mass, films that have been in my head for a long time and that I think about simultaneously. The fourth comedy and proverb was Full Moon in Paris in 1984. The film's proverb was invented by Rohmer himself. The one who has two wives loses his soul. The one who has two houses loses his mind. The film's cinematographer and art Oberta called it one of the most luxurious films ever made, because of the high amount of preparation put into it. The film began with Rohmer and the actors discussing the roles and reading from the film's scenario while tape recording the rehearsals. Rohmer then rewrote the script based on these sessions and shot the film on Super 8mm as a dress rehearsal. When the film was finally shot, Rohmer often used between 2 and 3 takes for each shot, and sometimes only one take. Alain Bergala and Alain Philippon have stated that all the art of Éric Rohmer consists of creating on the set a veritable osmosis among himself, the actors and the technicians. Rohmer even encouraged actress Pascale Augier to design sets for the film since her character is an interior decorator. Augier later won the Best Actress award at the Venice Film Festival. Alain Philippon called the film one of the most accomplished films that Rohmer has given us, and that if the film moves it is because of its own risk-taking. The fifth comedy and proverb was The Green Ray in 1986. Rohmer explained that, "I was struck by the naturalness of television interviews. You can say that here, nature is perfect. If you look for it, you find it because people forget the cameras." As was becoming his custom in pre-production, Rohmer gathered his cast together to discuss the project and their characters, but then allowed each actor to invent their own dialogue. Rohmer stated that lead actress Marie Riviere is the one who called the shots, not only by what she said but by the way she'd speak, the way she'd question people, and also by the questions her character evoked from the others. The film was shot chronologically and in 16mm so as to be as inconspicuous as possible, to have Delphine blend into the crowd as a way, ultimately, of accentuating her isolation. Rohmer also instructed his cinematographer Sophie Maintainu to keep technical aspects of the shoot to a minimum so as to not interrupt or distract the actors. The film's only major expense was a trip to the Canary Islands in order to film The Green Rays there. Rohmer chose to premiere the film on Canal Plus TV, a pay TV station that paid $130,000 for the film, which was only 1/5 of its budget. Rohmer stated that, "Cinema here will survive only because of television. Without such an alliance we won't be able to afford French films." The experiment paid off when the film was a theatrical hit after being released 3 days after its initial broadcast. It won the Golden Lion and the FIPRESCI Prize at the 1986 Venice Film Festival. It was mostly praised by film critics, although Alain Robert Grillet wrote an unfavorable review and stated, "I didn't like it very much." The sixth comedy and proverb was Boyfriends and Girlfriends in 1987. 1987 to 2009, later film career. He followed these with a third series in the 1990s, Tales of the Four Seasons. Conte de Automne or Autumn Tale was a critically acclaimed release in 1999 when Rohmer was 79. Beginning in the 2000s, Rohmer, in his 80s, returned to period drama with The Lady and the Duke and Triple Agent. The Lady and the Duke caused considerable controversy in France, where its negative portrayal of the French Revolution led some critics to label it monarchist propaganda. Its innovative cinematic style and strong acting performances led it to be well received elsewhere. In 2001, his life's work was recognized when he received the Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival. In 2007, Rohmer's final film, The Romance of Astrid and Celadon, was shown during the Venice Film Festival, at which he spoke of retiring. Rohmer's style. Rohmer's films concentrate on intelligent, articulate protagonists who frequently fail to own up to their desires. The contrast between what they say and what they do fuels much of the drama in his films. Gerard Legrand once said that he is one of the rare filmmakers who is constantly inviting you to be intelligent, indeed, more intelligent than his characters. Rohmer considered filmmaking to be close closer to the novel, to a certain classical style of novel which the cinema is now taking over, than the other forms of entertainment, like the theatre. Rohmer saw the full-face close-up as a device which does not reflect how we see each other and avoided its use. He avoids extra-diegetic music, seeing it as a violation of the fourth wall. He has on occasion departed from this rule, inserting soundtrack music in places in the Green Ray. Rohmer also tends to spend considerable time in his films showing his characters going from place to place, walking, driving, bicycling or commuting on a train, engaging the viewer in the idea that part of the day of each individual involves quotidian travel. This was most evident in Le Beau Mariage, which had the female protagonist constantly traveling, particularly between Paris and Le Mans. Rohmer typically populates his movies with people in their 20s, and the settings are often on pleasant beaches and popular resorts, notably in Le Collectionneurs, Pauline at the Beach, The Green Ray and A Summer's Tale. These films are immersed in an environment of bright sunlight, blue skies, green grass, sandy beaches, and clear waters. He explained that, "People sometimes ask me why most of the main characters in my films are young. I don't feel at ease with older people. I can't get people older than 40 to talk convincingly." Rohmer preferred to use non-professional actors in his films. He usually held a large number of rehearsals before shooting and would shoot his films very quickly. He spent little time editing his films. He usually shot his films chronologically, and often shot scenes during the time of day in which they took place. He explained that, "My films are based on meteorology. If I didn't call the weather service every day, I couldn't make my films because they're shot according to the weather outside. My films are slaves to weather." The director's characters engage in long conversations, mostly talking about man-woman relationships, but also on mundane issues like trying to find a vacation spot. There are also occasional digressions by the characters on literature and philosophy, as most of Rohmer's characters are middle-class and university-educated. A Summer's Tale has most of the elements of a typical Rohmer film. No soundtrack music, no close-ups, a seaside resort, long conversations between beautiful young people and discussions involving the characters' interests from songwriting to ethnology. Rohmer said he wanted to look at thoughts rather than actions, dealing less with what people do than what is going on in their minds while they are doing it. Beginning in the late 1970s during the production of Passez Val le Gaulois, Rohmer began to reduce the number of crew members on his films. He first dispensed of the script supervisor, then cut out the assistant director, then all other assistants and technical managers until, by the time he shot The Green Ray in 1986, his crew consisted only of a camera operator and a sound engineer. Rohmer stated that, "I even wonder if I could work in the usual conditions of filmmaking." His style was famously criticized by Gene Hackman's character in the 1975 film Night Moves, who describes viewing Rohmer's films as kind of like watching paint dry. Rohmer was a highly literary man. His films frequently refer to ideas and themes in plays and novels, such as references to Jules Verne, William Shakespeare and Pascal's Wager.